Hello YouTube, how are you? My name's Jude and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing the full card predictions and breakdown for UFC Fight Night Sacramento, Hernandez versus Rodrigues. And before we get into that, I just wanted to say to anyone who's watching this who watched my Dana White's Contender Series video for week 2, thank you guys, because that is quickly my most viewed video on YouTube. We're pretty close to about 250 views now, and I uploaded that on Saturday. So that's really encouraging, and yeah, I'm glad you guys are liking those videos. My UFC 330 predictions did really bad though, so it's kind of a give and take there, but we're gonna keep posting the UFC predictions anyways because it's just kind of random whether they do good or not. But we'll just get right into it. We went 8-4 on UFC 330, and the ones that we got wrong were Oral by Vicente Luque, Joel Alvarez, and Mansour Abdul Malik. But besides that, we went 8-4 overall. We're just going to get into UFC Sacramento right here, starting with our first fight on the card, which is going to be Chanel Dyer versus Elise Reed. And this one's kind of a setup fight. This isn't going to be a super long video in general, but especially on fights like these, we're not going to spend a lot of time this week. But yeah, Chanel Dyer did lose on Dana White's Contender Series to Carol Foro. Before that, she had a pair of fights in PFL, winning both of those. And then since then, she bounced back from her Dana White's Contender Series loss, where she was still signed, and got a second round knockout over Ravina Oliveira. And as for Elise Reed, 8-5 record. She's going to be 8 years older than Chanel Dyer here. She's going to be shorter and have a shorter reach as well. She is 2-3 in her last 5 fights, losing to Loma Lookboonmee by submission, beating Jinyu Frey by decision, losing to Lupi Godinez by submission, beating Jessica Penne, and then getting knocked out by Denise Gomes in her most recent performance at the start of round 2. I do think that there is high potential for a finish here on the Dyer side, so I am going to be picking Chanel Dyer by round 2 KO TKO. I think she has Elise Reed covered everywhere in this fight, and will be able to snowball into a finish in this one. And then our next fight on the card, we have Jackson McVeigh versus my boy, Party Time, Wes Schultz. Now, I am a pretty big fan of Wes Schultz, and that is not to say that I am delusional about his level of skill as an MMA fighter. Wes Schultz is a guy whose 3 professional losses are Dylan Budka, Mansour Abdul Malik, and Damian Pinas. The Pinas loss, not too bad, isn't going to age too bad. The Abdul Malik loss isn't aging great, and the Dylan Budka loss especially has aged pretty poorly, but that was early on the regional scene. For Wes Schultz, he was able to get an impressive first round Sulev stretch on Dana White's Contender Series last season against Mario Mengai, but Mengai, really not a very good fighter. He made Wes Schultz look very promising though. Wes Schultz then drops his debut to Damian Pinas, getting dropped a couple times, looking pretty defenseless on the feet, and getting finished in half a round. And then he was able to come back against Ben Johnston, and after dropping round 1 and 2 pretty comfortably, Ben Johnston decides to shoot in with his head on the outside, and after attempting about 10 guillotines in this fight, Wes Schultz finally gets one in round 3 and gets his first UFC win. I did pick against Wes Schultz in this fight. I am going to pick against Wes Schultz here, but if Wes Schultz does win, I'm going to put him in the channel banner, because middleweight was the one where it's like, oh, I don't really know who I'm going to put for as my favorite middleweight fighter, and it's currently Anthony Hernandez, who's also on this card, in the channel banner. But if Wes Schultz wins again, we're putting Wes Schultz in the banner. I'm a big Party Time fan, but I do think that Jackson McVeigh is going to be able to sort of beat him up on the feet in this one, especially in the clinch. Jackson McVeigh lost on short notice in his UFC debut to Bruno Ferreira. He He did have decent position in this one until he got reversed and put in an armbar. And then this fight against Zach Reese, he was touching up Zach Reese on the feet, dealing a lot of damage in the clinch, hurting Zach Reese pretty badly in this fight, and then sort of gassing out, getting taken down, and submitted in round 2. And that is Wes Schultz's path to victory here. I did really want to make my case for Wes Schultz. I did want to pick Wes Schultz. I just really don't like the striking or really the striking defense. But if he's able to take down Jackson McVeigh, I think this one could be over pretty quick. I think Wes Schultz is going to be the better grappler in this fight. But Jackson McVeigh's pressure on the feet, his frame, I think he's just the more imposing fighter, and I see Jackson McVeigh being able to put away Wes Schultz in the clinch here in round 1 with his knees and elbows. So we're going to be picking Jackson McVeigh to get this one done. I'm going to be rooting for Wes Schultz. I do want to get this one wrong because I really do like Wes Schultz. I didn't even say anything about the Dumas win for Jackson McVeigh. It's because I don't really rate it, but I also don't really rate Wes Schultz in the UFC as much as I want to. Next fight on the card, we have Gage Young taking on Stan Dorsonville. Now, Stan Dorsonville is going to be stepping in on short notice for this fight, and Stan Dorsonville, you look at the 5-0 record, you'd think he'd be pretty untested, and for the most part, that's not super untrue. But then we have Gage Young, who was also very untested on the regional scene before he did get signed to Dana White's Contender Series, where he fought against Quillen Salkild. And this loss is actually aging pretty well because he did take Quillen Salkild to decision. However, he was taken down 9 times in this fight against Quillen Salkild and was obviously outdone on the feet as well. Was pretty competitive, though, so not a bad loss for Gage Young. I just don't really like the 9 takedowns that he surrendered. That does mean that he was able to get back up against Quillen Salkild, but he just really didn't have many answers in the grappling. And since then, he did have to go back on the regional scene because he lost that one on the Contender Series, and the UFC signed him on short notice to fight Evan Elder. Now, a bit of a not-so-fun fact about this fight is Evan Elder was supposed to be fighting Ahmad Hassanzadeh, and then Hassanzadeh got, I believe, arrested for some pretty deranged things. You can look it up if you want. And then Gage Young was called up to fight Evan Elder on short notice. Now, I believe Evan Elder and Gage Young did train together, but this was a pretty good performance for Evan Elder and not a very good performance for Gage Young. I thought Evan Elder won this one 30-27 pretty comfortably. He was a step ahead on the feet, and the wrestling was just a non-factor in this fight. So yeah, Evan Elder able to beat Gage Young on short notice, but since then on 2 full camps, Gage Young has gone in there and beat Mahashate. I believe this one was in China. Was able to get this one done by a relatively close decision. And then most recently, we did pick Gage Young to beat Thiago Moises, I believe as an underdog in this fight. And he was able to beat Thiago Moises by decision. I do think that he won, but he did leave it a little closer than it probably could have been or should have been. This is probably the best win of Gage Young's career, but I don't really know how I rate Thiago Moises at that point in Moises' career, especially when Thiago Moises was coming off a first-round knockout loss to Jared Gordon. So yeah, that's a good win for Gage Young, but I'm not sure how much to really credit that. In terms of this matchup, Stan Dorsonville was booked to fight on August 28th in LFA, so he's not really just coming off the couch for this one. He's been in training camp. It'll just be abbreviated by a week for this fight, and Stan Dorsonville's good. I do really like what I've seen from Stan Dorsonville. I haven't been able to watch his entire career. I wasn't able to find this fight against Johnny Smith, which I would have liked to see. These ones I don't care too much about considering the level of opposition, but this win against Cedric Katambwa was a pretty impressive win. Stan Dorsonville was able to win 30-27 on the judges' scorecards, and he was able to outstrike Katambwa, hurt him on the feet, out-grapple him, and just outclass him. And at the time, as you can see, Katambwa was 4-0. Then this win by round 1 guillotine, and then I was able to watch this fight in the LFA against Dan Holt, another 4-0 prospect here, a solid prospect in Dan Holt that Stan was able to beat. In round 3, controlled most of the fight, looked good on the feet. He's just a very well-rounded fighter, and he has very long arms. He's going to have a 6-inch reach advantage here in this fight. Gage Young is a guy that cuts pretty easily. He doesn't wear damage very well. He's a very tough fighter, though, so I do think that Gage Young will stay in there. I think this one's going to be a competitive decision either way. And usually I don't pick short notice UFC debuts, but I'm going to take a dog shot here on Stan Dorsonville. I do really like what I've seen from Stan Dorsonville, and if the eye test proves me right here, I guess we'll see. I worded that one wrong. Bit of an awkward transition, but I am going to be picking Stan Dorsonville to win this one by decision. I like the striking, and I think the clinch work will either be slightly in favor of Stan Dorsonville, or it will just be a non-factor. But on the feet, I like Stan Dorsonville to win this one. He's proven to have 3-round cardio, and I like the fact that he was in training camp to fight a week later. So I'm going to be picking Stan Dorsonville. Then our next fight on the card, we have Marcio Barbosa fighting against another short notice UFC debut in Ryan Hughes. I didn't have to watch too much Ryan Hughes tape to know who my pick was going to be in this one. Originally, this was supposed to be Marcio Barbosa versus Danny Silva, and then Danny Silva discovered blood clots in his body. So get well, Danny Silva. Pretty bad news in the MMA space, but Ryan Hughes is who's stepping in on short notice to replace him. Marcio Barbosa is a guy that I really like in this UFC featherweight division as a prospect. I put him and Lorian Douglas in the thumbnail for this one. I think both are very, very good featherweight prospects, both fighting out of Brazil. Brazil has a lot to look forward to, especially at featherweight right now. Marcio Barbosa is a guy that has finished, I believe, all of his fights, if not 17 out of 18 fights, most of these coming in the first round. He has insane one-shot knockout power at featherweight. I've watched all 5 of his most recent fights, and all of them are brutal knockout finishes. This one on Dana White's Contender Series, not the best of opposition, but a very impressive result nonetheless. And then same here with his UFC debut. One of the best knockouts that I've seen all year still against Dennis Bazooka in about 2 minutes in that fight. And then Ryan Hughes, I don't need to say much because I'm going to be picking Marcio Barbosa regardless. But Ryan Hughes is a guy, 9-2, has some fights in LFA, has some fights in Fury, has some fights in Combate. But before that, he really was just sort of can-crushing. He does have a good win early on in his career against Makayis Urania, who was on this most recent season of The Ultimate Fighter. So that's a good win early on in the career of Ryan Hughes. He does have a split decision loss to Cameron Smotherman in Fury. He was able to pick up a win in LFA over Kevin Natividad, former UFC fighter, but Kevin Natividad is a guy who went 0-3 in the UFC. And then most recently, he fought a guy who was 7-6 in Samurai Fight House and picked up a ground and pound finish there. This one could get interesting if it leaves round 1. I just don't think it leaves round 1. Ryan Hughes does have some decent offensive wrestling. He's just a guy that has never finished a fight by submission. We don't really completely know what Marcio Barbosa looks like if a fight gets extended, but I don't think we have to worry about that here. We're just going to be picking Marcio Barbosa by round 1. TKO, lock it in. And then our next fight on the card, we have Nasrat Haqparast versus Chris Padilla. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. Chris Padilla is one of my favorite fighters in the UFC lightweight division. Him and Drew Dober are definitely my top 2. But he's going to be fighting against Nasrat Haqparast here. Chris Padilla is a guy who should be 5-0 in his UFC career. Instead, he's 4-0-1. Was signed on short notice to fight against James Yontop, Hamas Yontop, whichever one you want to say, and was able to scalp a win here by first-round submission against James Yontop, who was a decently touted prospect at the time. He was then able to put away Rongju with a nasty elbow in round 2, was then able to beat Jai Herbert in a close decision fight here. This one wasn't a great fight in terms of entertainment value, but I do think that Chris Padilla was the rightful winner. And then after that, got a ground and pound TKO over Ismail Bonfim in round 2 after Bonfim completely gassed out. Bonfim also missed weight in this fight by 5 or 6 pounds, I believe, and Padilla was still able to finish him. And then most recently, this fight against Markel Medeiros, he should have won. They originally announced him as the winner, and the judges apparently got it wrong and scored it a draw. Bit of a weird situation there. I do think he beat Markel Medeiros, who is also on this card. This fight should realistically be on the main card. I don't think this bout order is going to be finalized here, but this one should definitely be on the main card because he's going to be fighting against Nasrat Haqparast, who was on a 4 or 5 fight win streak before his loss to Quillen Salkeld, picking up wins over Landon Quinones, Jamie Malarkey, Jared Gordon, and Esteban Ribovic. You can argue he lost to Jared Gordon. You can argue he lost to Esteban Ribovic. And I believe that Chris Padilla at this point is a much better fighter than a guy like Jared Gordon. Maybe not much better, but he's definitely a much better fighter than a guy like Jared Gordon at this point in each of their careers. Both of these guys are going to be around the same age. Taco Padilla uses all 8 limbs. He uses his hands really well, he uses his legs very well, he uses his knees very well, and he uses his elbows very well. I really like the fighting style of Chris Padilla, and I like him in this one to win on the feet. I can see Chris Padilla potentially getting a late TKO victory in this one, breaking down Nasrat Haqparast, but I'm going to be picking Chris Padilla by decision. He does good work in the clinch. Sometimes he does kind of stall out a little bit, but I like Chris Padilla here in this matchup against Nasrat Haqparast. Haqparast is a good high-volume striker, but I think that Chris Padilla is... I think Chris Padilla will inflict more damage in this fight, and yeah, I think Chris Padilla is going to find more success in this matchup. Then our next prelim on the card, we have Shamil Gaziev versus Kennedy Nzechukwu. This one is kind of a head-scratcher for me. Wouldn't feel confident picking either guy. I don't feel confident with the pick that I'm about to tell you guys. Kennedy Nzechukwu was never really a great light heavyweight. He does have the one win over Carlos Ulberg super early on in both of their careers by being able to take an ungodly amount of damage against Carlos Ulberg. But in his last 5 fights, he just really hasn't been all that good. He lost to Ovince St. Preux right before Ovince St. Preux left the UFC. St. Preux was probably about 40 in this fight and was able to beat him at light heavyweight. They then fed him probably the 2 worst heavyweights they could have fed him in Chris Barnett and Lucas Dresky, and he was able to get round 1 finishes in both of those. He was submitted by Walter Walker in round 1 by heel hook. That's not the worst loss ever, but he was also hurt on the feet by Walter Walker early on in that one, and then he went to a draw most recently with Marcus Buchecha because of a point deduction. He did win 2 rounds of this fight, but because of the point deduction, it ended up being a majority draw, or a unanimous draw. So yeah, not really great on the side of Kennedy Nzechukwu, but I also don't think it's much better on the side of Shamil Gaziev. In Shamil Gaziev's last 5, and this is all 5 of his UFC fights, he lost to Jairzinho Rozenstruik in round 4, I believe it was, because it was a main event when it had no reason to be. He then picked up 2 wins over Dontel Mays and Thomas Peterson before picking up 2 more losses to Waldo Cortez Acosta in the first round and Brando Pericic in the first round. Shamil is a guy that does gas really badly. He really only has 1 round of cardio, and even then, at the end of round 1, he starts to tire a little bit, the volume starts to drop, the power starts to drop. I just really don't like the cardio or really the ability to wear damage for Shamil Gaziev in this fight. So yeah, we're gonna be picking good old fashioned Kennedy and Nzechukwu unanimous decision win here. Nzechukwu could get a late finish. He could get an early finish. I don't feel great picking a decision in this fight, but I also expect this one to be pretty sloppy. Um, I just I'm picking Kennedy and Nzechukwu. Moving up from 205, he's going to be the much faster guy, the much fresher guy. Um, he's only 2 years younger, but it seems like Kennedy and Nzechukwu is a lot younger than Shamil Gaziev. So yeah, we're picking Kennedy and Nzechukwu to get this one done by decision. And then our next fight on the card, we have Jamal Emmers versus Lorian Douglas. Teammate of Chris Padilla, Jamal Emmers. I actually think Jamal Emmers is pretty good. Now, that isn't going to be enough to change who I'm picking here, but I do think that Jamal Emmers is a pretty underrated UFC featherweight. He is getting on the older side. He just turned 37. In his last 5, he lost a split decision to Jack Jenkins that he probably should have won. I thought he won this fight against Jack Jenkins. And then he was able to pick up a early finish over Dennis Bazooka in about 50 seconds. Lost to Nate Landwehr. This one was disappointing because he hurt Nate Landwehr early and got put away in round 2. Not a great look. This one was 2 years ago, though, back when Nate Landwehr still had a little bit left in the tank, and since then has picked up a win over Gabriel Miranda by knockout and a unanimous decision win over Hyder Emil, where he was able to out-grapple Hyder Emil and pick up a pretty straightforward decision there. Now, for Lorian Douglas, this is a guy who's been knocking out a lot of people. Now, there are some pretty questionable blemishes on the early record of Lorian Douglas, but he's been lights out as of recent. And in his last 5, he's 5-0 with wins all in LFA, Contender Series, and UFC. Picked up a win over Nathan Garib by TKO. Picked up a win over Javier Reyes, who's now in the UFC, by TKO in LFA. And then picked up a win over Elijah Johns in his last LFA fight. Knocked out Cam Teague in 40 seconds here. Brutal knockout on the Contender Series. And then probably an even more brutal, just albeit more extended version of that against Julian Erosa in his debut. Drops Julian Erosa 3 or 4 times and finally puts him away. He was dropping Julian Erosa with a jab. Lorian Douglas has crazy power at 145, and I'm not going to overcomplicate things here. We're going to be picking Lorian Douglas by round 1 TKO. Then our next fight on the card, this is our first main card fight. We have Anthony Wint, who we just recently had to break down for week 1 of the Contender Series, fighting against Terrence Chapman. And yeah, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this one. Haven't done too much due diligence watching my Terrence Chapman tape, but losing to Myron Dennis by split decision tells me about all I need to know. Myron Dennis, a very old heavyweight, a little bit crafty, but Myron Dennis just recently kind of got smoked by Miles Banks. Anthony Wint puts away Miles Banks in 30 seconds. I think this one's pretty straightforward. Terrence Chapman, decent. Like, he was able to finish Omar Al Salah, whereas Anthony Wint struggled to win a decision against Omar Al Salah. But I just really don't like this Myron Dennis performance. I did watch this fight. It wasn't a very good fight. Not what we really wanted to see or what we need to see out of Terrence Chapman to be able to pick him against Anthony Wint here. This is going to be short notice for both guys. Anthony Wint wanted this. I think this is a pretty straightforward round 1 TKO again for Anthony Wint. But yeah, this is, I guess, good for Terrence Chapman if he's able to get a second UFC opportunity out of it, because that will just mean that he bypassed the Contender Series. Kind of the same thing for Ryan Hughes when you think about it. Yeah, kind of the same. And then for our next fight on the card, we have Carly Giudice versus Jaisla Chavez. I don't think this one should stay on the main card, I'm not going to lie. This is a decent women's MMA fight, but this one we have Carly Giudice taking on Jaisla Chavez. I think that Carly Giudice is the better fighter here. Jaisla Chavez has struggled with some low-level competition on the regional scene and in the UFC. Her fight on the Dana White's Contender Series, a very close fight with Sofia Montenegro, who I also don't think was anything special. And then, yeah, kind of got proved right here when she fought Yanesi Dubin in her UFC debut. I picked Chavez with a decent degree of confidence because I just don't think that Dubin's very good at all. And Dubin made it close. This was not what you really wanted to see out of Jaisla Chavez. I think she'll probably struggle. She'll struggle quite a bit on the feet. I know that for a fact in this fight, and I don't think her ground game is going to be enough to get Carly Judas in any sort of trouble in this fight. Carly Judas, I believe 5 of her 6 wins are by knockout/TKO, which for a women's fighter is kind of unheard of, especially when she got signed to the UFC at 3-1. She was 3-0, lost in the Contender Series to Carrot Skada, lost to Gabriela Hernandez in her UFC debut. I thought she won this fight, and you can make the argument for the Carrot Skada fight as well. But since then, she's put together 3 wins in the UFC, knocking out Dubin in a round. So mutual opponent there, was able to finish Nicole Cagliari too. So that's a decent win for Carly Judas as well. She's just creating more separation from this level of competition in the UFC. She did go to Juliana Miller, or a decision with Juliana Miller in her last fight, but I don't think that's necessarily the worst look in the world. She still won that fight. And Juliana Miller is a little bit of a tricky grappler if she can get you down. I don't think Jaisla Chavez is going to be able to get Carly Judas down, and I think that Carly Judas finds a finish here in round 2 or round 3. So we're going to say round 2 TKO for Carly Judas. Then our next fight on the card, we have a fun lightweight matchup between Markel Medeiros and Mason Jones. Markel Medeiros, technically unblemished in his UFC career, with 3 wins and 1 draw, the draw being Chris Padilla. We talked about it earlier. Don't think Markel Medeiros should have won this fight. You can argue that he did win the round where he cut open Chris Padilla, but besides that, Chris Padilla pretty much controlled the fight and outpaced Markel Medeiros, outdogged him really, and that's not a good sign when you're going to be fighting against Mason Jones. I think Mason Jones and Chris Padilla, relatively similar skill level. I'm not going to say they're like similar fighters, because they're not. They're pretty different fighters in terms of their striking styles, but in terms of skill level, I think they're pretty similar. I think Mason Jones is pretty good. I'm not going to lie. Markel Medeiros' 3 wins in the UFC are to Landon Quinones. This wasn't a great fight. This wasn't an impressive win to me. This one against Austin Hubbard, also not an impressive win to me at all. And then this fight against Mark Choinsky, they signed Mark Choinsky on short notice for this one, and Markel Medeiros is somehow allergic to a finish in this fight because he hurts Mark Choinsky to the legs. He's obviously the much better fighter than Choinsky, and he carries him to a decision in that one. Whereas on the side of Mason Jones, since being re-signed to the UFC, this is now Mason Jones' second run in the UFC. He picked up a win against Jeremy Stephens in a fight where he didn't really shoot many takedowns. He shot a couple, but not really early on in the fight when he could have just got Jeremy Stephens out of there pretty quick, like we saw Bobby Green do. He obliged Jeremy Stephens on the feet because he was fighting in Jeremy Stephens' hometown, and he beats Jeremy Stephens on the feet. He wins round 1 and 2. Relatively competitive at points, but he was the clear winner. Got a win over Balaji Oki here. Faces a little bit of trouble early on in this one, and then is able to turn the tables on Balaji Oki and find a ground and pound finish. And then most recently against Axel Sola. Axel Sola takes the first round. This was a really good fight, really competitive fight for both guys, but Mason Jones takes over. He keeps going forward, he keeps pressuring, he mixes in combos, mixes to the body well. I think Mason Jones is a dog. I don't think Markel Medeiros is going to be able to really hurt him here. He might be able to cut him open like he did to Chris Padilla, but I don't think he's really going to rock Mason Jones unless he works something crafty in there. But Markel Medeiros is a very technical sort of point fighter. Mason Jones is kind of a brawler. I like Mason Jones in this one. I just think he's going to go for it more. So we're going to be picking Mason Jones to win this one by bloody decision. Then we've made it to the featured fight on the card. We have Rainer de Ritter versus Roman Dolidze. These are 2 guys who are making their light heavyweight debut. Did I say that right? Light heavyweight debut. After fighting for most of their careers, or at least most of their careers in the UFC at middleweight. Roman Dolidze has had fights at 205 in the UFC before. I believe that's where he beat Anthony Smith. I think that was a light heavyweight fight when he fought Anthony Smith, and then was able to pick up the win over Kevin Holland, where Holland got injured. Dolidze probably wins anyways, and then the win over Marvin Vettori. This was a scrap against Marvin Vettori on the feet primarily. Not the worst win in the world, but also not super impressive. This is like a 3-2 fight, if I remember correctly. I didn't rewatch it for this, I'm not going to lie. And then his two most recent losses are to Anthony Hernandez in a fight where he got dog-walked, and he had a pace put on him, really, and Anthony Hernandez submits him in round 4 of this one, sort of drags him across the octagon as he's choking him. And then his most recent fight against Christian Leroy Duncan. Christian Leroy Duncan is having all the success on the feet. Eventually, Roman Dolidze does get a takedown and is able to find a little bit of control against Christian Leroy Duncan, but not really mount any damage or have any real submission threat. So Christian Leroy Duncan gets this one done by decision. As for Reinier de Ridder, this was a guy who was a very active fighter at middleweight when he first fought, and I do think he was sort of depleting himself. He was always a big 185er. I think he's going to look bigger at 205 than Roman Dolidze does. He also has a win over Kevin Holland by submission, so mutual opponent for both of these guys. They both make it look equally easy. He was able to beat Bo Nickel, though. This is a win that's aging pretty well. Will continue to. And then the best win, probably of his career, definitely of his career, coming against Robert Whittaker in a 5-round main event. That fight alone is better than anything that Roman Dolidze has done in his career. It's a better win than any win that Roman Dolidze has in his career. He is on an unfortunate skid, though, to Brendan Allen, where he kind of just quit on the stool, and then Kyle Borralho, where he just didn't do enough. This was a relatively competitive fight. Borralho, the clear winner. I think Borralho would have created more distance against Roman Dolidze, and I also think Brendan Allen's the better fighter than Roman Dolidze at this point. So in a 3-round fight at 205, no weight cut, I'm not really going to have to worry about the 3-round cardio of Reinier de Ridder. I'm going to be picking Reinier de Ridder to win this one. Not super sure the method of victory, but in a 3-round fight, I'm going to say a decision here. I could see potentially a sub. Kind of doubtful that there's a KO in this fight on either side. And then our co-main event of the evening, we have Sergey Spivak taking on Vitor Petrino. And this one is a true 50-50 split on Tapology. The odds don't agree as much, as Vitor Petrino is a -170 favorite right now. And this is the one that I've had the hardest time settling with a pick on. I say this in pretty much all my videos. I say who is my least confident pick of the card, and this one is my least confident pick on the card. We have Vitor Petrino, who was a decent undefeated prospect, did lose his O to Anthony Smith at UFC 301. I actually did pick Anthony Smith to win this fight, even though Vitor Petrino was like -500 favorite. But this was before I tracked my picks on Tapology, so it doesn't matter. But I did pick Anthony Smith, just for the record. He did suffer a second loss in a row to Dustin Jacoby, gets knocked out in round 3 at UFC Tampa, I believe, later on in that year. And then since moving up to heavyweight, he's put together 3 straight wins, was able to submit Austin Lane on the ground, was able to put away Thomas Peterson in round 3, was able to defend the takedowns in that one, and have more of the success on the feet. And then against Steven Asplund, this one was a bit sketchy. This one was a little bit sketchy, I won't lie, because he gets dropped in round 1 pretty bad, and he wins round 2 pretty clearly, but then round 3 he gets rocked really bad on the feet again. He wins this one, I think in part because of the damage, and I think that he was able to mount more offense in the third. It was a really close third round, though. Close fight in general with Steven Asplund. Doesn't make me super confident going into this one for him, but I'm also not confident on the Sergey Spivak side. Both these guys going to be the same height, relatively. Going to have a close reach. 1-inch height advantage for Spivak, I guess, but they're going to look about the same size in there, about the same weight as well. Vitor Petrino is going to be about 3 years younger in this one, and yeah, I'm just not really completely sure what to make of this one. Sergey Spivak, in his last fight, picked up a decision win over Ante D'Elia in a fight that was primarily striking. So this was a decent win for Sergey Spivak, considering what Ante D'Elia did to Marcin Tybura. And not to do a ton of MMA math here, but Rakic wasn't able to put away Marcin Tybura. Sergey Spivak and who else? Ante D'Elia both put away Marcin Tybura in one round. But before that, he did drop 2 losses in a row. He lost to Waldo Cortez Acosta in a really competitive striking fight, where he was unable to get the win. He wasn't able to mount a ton of wrestling offense in this one, and was, I guess, sort of a step behind. But this was a really close fight. And then this loss to Jailton Almeida, not a great look, but Vitor Petrino, not close to the level of wrestler/grappler that Jailton Almeida is, in my opinion, even though Jailton Almeida is no longer with the UFC. This is the Marcin Tybura domination that I talked about. So this one's tricky for me because I don't really see the Vitor Petrino knockout coming in this one. Vitor Petrino was able to sting Steven Asplund on the feet at times, but he wasn't able to drop him or anything super dramatic. So I'm not sure that he will be able to Sergey Spivak. Spivak, really only a guy that's been knocked out on the feet by Walt Harris in his debut. That was ages ago. But on the feet, his only 2 knockout losses are to Cyril Gane and Tom Aspinall. Was knocked out with ground and pound, or finished with ground and pound, by Jailton Almeida. I don't think Vitor Petrino will have that opportunity unless he is able to knock down Sergey Spivak on the feet. But I don't think that happens. I think the grappling advantage here goes to Sergey Spivak. I like Sergey Spivak's jab. I don't hate the cardio for a 3-round fight. I don't think Vitor Petrino has very good cardio, because in that Asplund fight, he was just constantly resetting. He was walking away, taking breaks in this fight, trying to get air. And Asplund was just kind of letting him off the hook when he did that instead of pushing him against the cage. So I think Sergey Spivak will have opportunities to get Vitor Petrino against the cage here. And if he gets him down, he'll probably win that round. So I'm going to be picking Sergey Spivak here to win this fight by decision. But I don't feel good about it. I do think that there's a solid chance Vitor Petrino can keep this fight on the feet and out tit for tat Sergey Spivak, hurt him at times, and maybe get some damage on the face. But I'm going to be picking Sergey Spivak. I like the striking improvements that I've seen, and I think he's the clear better fighter on the ground. So give me Spivak there as an underdog. And then our main event of the evening, we have Anthony Hernandez taking on Gregory RoboCop Obama Rodrigues. So Anthony Hernandez, one of my favorite middleweights. I'm a big fan of Anthony Hernandez. Pressure grappler style, weaponizes his cardio and weaponizes his grit, really, his toughness in a lot of these fights. Now, the narrative that I've seen pretty much anybody that's picking Gregory Rodrigues go with is that Anthony Hernandez is weak to the body, which is somewhat true. He's been hurt to the body in several of his fights. He's only been finished that way twice in the UFC, which only isn't a great adjective to have there. He got put away by Kevin Holland with the knee to the body early on in his career, and then most recently got put away by Sean Strickland against the cage in round 3 with body shots, some mixed in upstairs as well. Just a flurry that he could not handle against Sean Strickland, but that's not a loss that has aged bad at all, considering Sean Strickland then went on to beat Khamzat Chimaev, who is really kind of just a better version of Anthony Hernandez for the middleweight title. I think it's needless to say that Sean Strickland beats Gregory Rodrigues, so you can't really fault Anthony Hernandez all that much for that loss. I know some people are trying to draw the comparison. They're saying Gregory Rodrigues hits much harder than Sean Strickland. He can do the same thing. He can work to the body. But the thing about that is that Gregory Rodrigues just really doesn't work to the body all that much. It's really just he throws some straight shots to the body, but he's not throwing hooks. He's not throwing a ton of knees. He's not throwing a ton of teeps. He's not throwing a ton of body kicks in general. So if Anthony Hernandez is able to defend that for really a round and a half, 2 rounds, I like him a lot in this matchup. It's been proven that Gregory Rodrigues does gas out. He gassed out really badly against Roman Kopylov 2 fights ago, and he gassed out really badly against Jared Cannonier. Halfway through round 3, he has nothing left for Cannonier, gets hurt badly at the end of round 2, gets finished at the very start of round 4, and this is a fight that barely had any grappling involved in it, and it was just pure striking. Jared Cannonier able to survive getting dropped by Gregory Rodrigues twice, able to survive getting hurt to the head, and was able to mount his comeback and put Gregory Rodrigues away. Since then, Gregory Rodrigues has been on a nice little streak. He knocked out Jack Hermanson in the first round, beats Roman Kopylov, gets taken down by Roman Kopylov. I think that is something important to note. Also got taken down by Jared Cannonier once in their fight, and then was able to avenge an early loss against Bruno Ferreira pretty much a minute and a half, 2 minutes into this fight. This was a good performance from Gregory Rodrigues. I don't think a repeat is in order here. Anthony Hernandez has made his way up to the top of the middleweight division and has been fighting pretty good competition in his last 5. He was able to submit Roman Kopylov at UFC 298, was able to finish Michel Pereira in round 5 of their main event, was able to outdo Brendan Allen in a 3-round fight where he won 29-28, and was able to dominate Roman Dolidze, finish him in round 4, to really just put a pace on Roman Dolidze, who is a good grappler. I do think that Roman Dolidze is probably a better pure grappler than Gregory Rodrigues. Obviously, Gregory Rodrigues carries way more power and is a completely different striking beast than Roman Dolidze is. But all that is to say, I am going to be picking Anthony Hernandez here. I will be sort of shitting bricks in round 1 of this fight, worried that Gregory Rodrigues is just going to snipe Anthony Hernandez on the feet. But Anthony Hernandez isn't really a guy that gets hurt to the head all too often. He did get hurt to the head against Sean Strickland, but besides that, not really a guy that gets rocked to the head all that much. It's mainly to the body. I already explained why I'm not super concerned about the body shots here. Obviously, Gregory Rodrigues could show us something new. He could show new levels to his game, new dimension. But I like Fluffy here. I like the cardio. I like the pace. I do think that he's just going to wear down Gregory Rodrigues, and I hope for Fluffy's sake that he just goes for the takedowns this time. He really didn't shoot against Sean Strickland all that much. I hope he just tries to back up Gregory Rodrigues against the cage and work his wrestling sooner rather than later. I think it will wear on the gas tank of Gregory Rodrigues quite a bit, and I think it will soften up Gregory Rodrigues to get finished eventually in this fight. I think round 3, round 4 is the realistic time frame for that. So we're going to be picking Anthony Hernandez to win this fight by ground and pound KO TKO in round 3. Or we'll say round 4. Anthony Hernandez is the pick, and those are my picks for UFC Fight Night Sacramento. So there will be a new Dana White's Contender Series video for week 3 coming out later this week. I am back at college now, so it's going to be a little less consistent with the upload schedule, but I still do plan to upload UFC prediction videos every week, and the same goes for the Contender Series. Really excited about the support that I've received on my Contender Series videos, so I will definitely keep pushing those out. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.